So, Hadas, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Hadas Kedar. I'm a doctoral student for communication studies here in Germany. Previously, I studied art and education, and I'm a teacher actually professionally. I used to teach art and video, and I also used to do back in Israel TV news moderation for alternative news. But in the last couple of years, I've become much more seriously active in the pro-Palestinian movement here in Germany. Also, demonstrations, but in parallel, also as part of my academic environment, I would call it. We've been organizing events, and I've been speaking within the academy with students as well.
So, I guess you have become quite prominent in German circles. I mean, among other things, because you'd been very present in demonstrating and you'd been quite outspoken. Very recently, you gave an interview to TRT talking about uh, Israeli education and the way that
Mm-hmm.
Israeli education has shaped your view or shapes public views of Arabs and Palestinians in particular. So let's make that our chapter one, so to say, and
Mm-hmm.
take you back a bit to that also because you were part of the pedagogic sort of system in Israel. So you would have both sides of that story, I imagine, to tell. And I will say, I mean, one of the reasons why I was very interested in talking to you is because in a lot of the discussions that one finds oneself online, one of the things that I'm sure you have heard repeatedly is that the Palestinians teach their children to be anti-Semites, essentially, and then everything that is added to that is murderous anti-Semites and sort of violent anti-Semites and so on and so forth. And there is a narration, that a parallel narration, which is hidden, I think, which is what happens in the Israeli educational system. So if I can bother you first with that.
Yeah, and I think I also became myself much more aware of how much this is not really known outside of Israel. And then I figured, yeah, of course, it's a bit like in every society. You don't really understand what's going on inside. And I understood that it is very important to talk about what's going on inside because it reflects on the deeds and the behavior of that society. And education was it's just one aspect. And because I have also a very good memory of my own childhood and growing up, I think I have this contribution to be able to describe what I've experienced. And because it always interests me, also later as a teacher. So I kept this a bit like as a recorded
So
material.
how do you remember? I mean, what is the general characterization you'd make of that education process as a student?
First and foremost, Zionist, something I had to relearn, de-learn, and understand better as an
What,
adult.
so can I ask you, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, it
Yeah.
just every time I talk to Israelis, and I talk to quite a few, there is, I mean, I think that the best line was actually Avram Burg, former president of the
Mm,
Knesset, who I said, well, will Zionism survive this? And he responded, I thought brilliantly, by telling me that's a completely stupid question. Zionism doesn't exist anymore. It's no longer an issue. Um,
Interesting. It is still in progress. I myself am still learning Zionism, but I can definitely tell. Zionism is the ideology which we, as particularly as Israelis, grow up on without the title. So we don't know it's really Zionism. It's a word we do here, and it appears in many official documents and songs. But it's a bit like the air you breathe.
so
So
you're a
in every
Zionist
kind,
without knowing that you're a Zionist.
yes, Yes, literally. I had to come out of this and give it a name in order to start dealing with it then later. So when I say that you grow up in an education system that is first and foremost Zionist, it means that everything you learn in that system is adhering to that ideology, which, yes, you can define it in different ways, and it has developed over time and has changed. But I think that I can give a few highlights of what has always been there. First of all, it's the superiority of Jewish people above everyone else, actually, but particularly Arabs and Palestinians, the natives of the land. And it's also the kind of combination with democracy, but in a way that not every democratic country might agree on, because it's a democracy for the Jews and always in questions for the Palestinians, whether they are Israeli citizens or not. And I think there's another factor within Zionism, which I don't think many people understand. It's very based on the victimization of the Jews. So the whole idea of Zionism is the alternative, the only alternative for the Jewish question, just like the Zionists used to call it in the past, is becoming their own nation and later becoming their own nation in the land of Palestine. And with this notion, you grow up as a kid, even if these words are not talked to you like that.
Do you remember stories or do you remember tales as to that would, I guess, represent this dynamic to children?
Wow, many. But
I mean, I'm asking you because as you were talking, I mean, something that struck me, which really, I'm just repeating something you just said, which is people, of course, people would not know. And I think that very often we just completely forget about the place that primary and secondary education, which is almost verges with the intimacy of the home, right? I mean, you don't go
yeah,
really looking into classrooms to understand what is the more general political outlook of a public sphere. But I think that the point
yeah.
you make is actually really quite fantastic because it's probably precisely there where we begin to understand. So I'm wondering what kind of stories are told to bring that sort of to flesh that out.
One thing that comes up is the way we are taught about the Holocaust. And I heard about from Americans that it's very similar there, but I think we know that Zionism is way beyond the borders of Israel, whatever those borders are, by the way. But Americans, and especially American Jews, also talk about having very similar kind of education about Judaism. And one of the things about the Holocaust, first of all, it's the most important topic in school. It's also the most important topic generally. And you are being taught about it from the age of, I like to say, 0, because that's literally the way it is. And once you get into kindergarten, you are already having to experience the once a year. Of course, there's a memorial for the Holocaust, for the survivors. And for me, it was much more personal because in my own family, I had 4 grandparents. Each of them was a survivor of the Holocaust from Poland and from Hungary. And for me, it was also coming from within home. My Hungarian grandmother used to tell me a lot of stories about the Holocaust. And therefore, within school, it was a whole, it was so merged, the kind of story of the Holocaust of being so real and so scary and so terrible, so that my whole identity was actually built on top of that. And I remember very clearly a teacher it was high school already, my teacher said, we talked about the Holocaust, it was the Memorial Day, and we had a conversation as always, where she talks to the students and we have to say what we think. And she said, you know that it's said that Jews were led like a flock to the slaughterhouse. It wasn't the first time I heard that sentence. It's very repeatedly said to children, that one critique of the Jews in the Holocaust is that it's a bit their fault in a way. Like they really just, they didn't fight, they didn't object.
Korban Netzi, right?
Hmm?
Korban Netzi.
Yeah,
This idea
yeah,
of like the eternal victim, which is actually a very old
yes,
Zionist insult, as a matter of fact.
yes, yes. And I remember that already there, I wasn't aware politically at all because I grew up in a very normal house where this was not talked. So I always got hunches about things. I didn't like the way she asked it because she was being critical and she didn't accept certain answers in class. So it was really just about telling us this is what it was. Jews went like to the slaughterhouse like flock, and this is the narrative. Like there was not even, it wasn't a real discussion. That's what I want to say. It's also, and nowadays, when there's recently a book that was published about the radical Jewish tradition, and now came out in German also. So there was some events here, and I met the authors. I had the honor, and I have to say, she talked about this. Janie Stone. She talked about this belief or this. Um, it's quite a fake kind of notion that Jews just did that, and she emphasizes how much objection Jewish people during the Holocaust. And I really thought, wow, imagine growing up like that, believing that we were fighting for our own freedom. And also because it's a human thing. That's the thing. You don't have to be a very certain kind of a ethnicity or religion to think that once you're being oppressed and pushed so hard, you try to survive. It's a survival mode. You try to fight if you have the capacity. And to tell us kids that Jews were like that, and that's why it's a bit on us, and therefore the state of Israel is all we have, so everything else doesn't matter. The Arabs, they didn't say Palestinians in school, they would say Arabs, everything, and we have to fight and protect ourselves. So we became from a victim to a perpetrator, actually. In school, they would talk about it as a heroic protection of the only land we have. And this was always connected. In Israel, the Memorial Day of the Holocaust is a few days before the Memorial Day for the victims of soldiers being killed in war. So it's a whole week in the system where you are dealing with those questions it's really literally also chronologically from the Holocaust and towards nowadays and Israel.
It's quite remarkable because, I mean, being a Jew from the diaspora, I actually have been the butt in many ways of precisely this kind of discourse. From, I wouldn't even say the Zionist machine, I would say from Israelis very often, which many of them would not even, they would only recognize themselves as Zionist if you really just push all the way through. But I mean, as you were pointing out, this is not Zionism. This is just what nature would give to anybody with a capacity for reason. And, you know, I mean, coming from where I come, my heroes were people like Marek Edelman, I mean, second in command, or Mordechai Anilevich, right, who fought in the Warsaw Ghetto with their bare hands to stop an army. But I think that was always very interesting was that it extended way beyond the question of the sheep to the slaughterhouse, which actually Hannah Arendt also talks about this figure in Eichmann in Jerusalem. It really was just a generic dislike for the Jews of the so-called diaspora. There's a sense that they were just not good enough. They were, you know, essentially every Jew out there was an Israeli impotence, which was not actualized. And only once actualized, it would really be able to, you know, be respected as such, so to say. And I always found that incredibly off-putting. I wanted to ask you about your memories of the way that the Arab was presented and the suppression, of course, of Palestinian identity within that context.
Um, for that, I think I can give an example already as a teacher, because I think it's also telling. When there was one of the operations in the 2000s, 2010s, I was there teaching also high school, and it was very difficult for me because, as always, the students, so the Jewish part of the population, feels attacked and is again in this victimized mode. And therefore, it's almost impossible to talk about anything else. But as a teacher, I felt like we have to talk about the picture also, from an intellectual point of view. And I took, there was a very nice project online where it was an art project. They filmed Israeli children from Gaza and from Sderot, which is the closest city to Gaza. And they made some kind of a parallel. They designed it in a parallel way just to try to higher the level of humanity of the Palestinians. So to show these are children, and here's another child the same age with similar dreams talking about himself from beyond the fence. And I found it amazing to use it as an educational tool, because it was clear to me that my students, as much as of the left school that I was, relatively left, but it's of course liberal Zionist left. That's the left existing in Israel, apart from very small fraction of real left of combining Arabs and Israelis together. And I showed this project just to come back to the human level. And some students were uncomfortable. And one girl was standing up at some point, and she said, "My father is in the army and I'm going to report on you." And she left stormingly the classroom. And of course I was scared, and because I knew that even in a school relatively open like mine, there are limits where I'm not allowed to talk about certain things. But in this case, I just didn't expect it, because I was talking about children, about the humanity of children. And there was nothing even really political about it per se. And just the fact that I was trying to show someone that to them is our enemy, to show the humanity of her enemy, although it's a child, no? And threatening that she would report on me, I really understood that this is way beyond what one thinks. The dehumanization of the Palestinians among the Israeli society is so deep that they don't see anything beyond that. That was quite a telling experience for me.
There is a story of Meir Baruchnin, I think it's the name. I mean, I don't know if you followed it, but also a high school teacher, this after the 7th of October. The story is actually, I mean, obviously reminded me of that immediately, because he was showing pictures of victims, civilians, I think that to a large degree children. Not only he was fired, but he was jailed, put in, I believe, solitary confinement for a couple of days. So I imagine that since those days, the situation must have become a lot more difficult. Do you
Yes.
have any sense of what is the state of conversation now inside elementary schools and high schools?
Not necessarily inside schools, but some of my ex-students are still following me on social media, and some teachers that I used to work with, and mostly agree on things. But I went more radically left than them, of course, and because I started to relearn a lot of things that a lot of people in Israel just are completely unaware of, unfortunately. And the situation, I can tell from the discourse that I'm seeing, it's really horrible. And on some social media posts, some ex-students of mine would react in a serious attack against me, and that I should be ashamed of myself. And this could be on some more radical things I publish regarding, for example, the torture and the rape in Israeli prisons, which is something that at the moment these days is very bothering me. And also some other kind of documentation that I've been seeing from Gaza. Students would attack me, ex-students attack me, And it's quite acceptable to discuss this way, to attack you for just exposing all kinds of informations from what is going on, even without your opinion on it. And that's more extreme than my time, because I always used to do such things on social media, also as a teacher, I have to say. And nowadays, if I would still live in Israel, I don't think, and having also a young girl like I have, I don't think I would risk my life like this. It's much more risky.
I was just thinking, I mean, I think it was around 2014, 2015, Rivlin, then president of Israel and president over Netanyahu, I mean, said that Israel was a nation sick of racism. This was not really coming from the left, right? I mean, this was not actually somebody who represented, this was not a Ofar Kasif or somebody like that. I mean, it was really somebody that came from the establishment. And he actually even built a campaign. I remember one particular episode in which he brought like Arab children or maybe one Arab child to the presidential office and sat him there. And, you know, during the period, I mean, 2014, 2015, 2016 even, I think, there were quite a few studies coming out of schools in Israel on the question of racism, anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian racism. How prevalent do you remember it being, besides the question of Palestinians or Arabs being thought of as the enemy? How prevalent was this kind of racism in the education, especially in the earliest years, I suppose, especially in the elementary school years?
I think it's in nuances. For example, teachers or other adults would say, "He's an Arab," you know. They would whisper it. That's already telling a lot, because it's a bit like Arab is a bad word, so you shouldn't pronounce it. It took me years to get out of that and start saying Arabs, you know, just like I would say Jews or Christian. It's quite strong. It would also present itself in the way you've been taught history, for sure, for sure. Arabs were always first of all, they always had some kind of a description of what they were. They were, fighters or terrorists or whatever. Talking about Israel, you know, establishing itself and having all kinds of wars. The Jewish fighters were heroes. These words were used also, no? And the Arabs were, you know, the old-fashioned. Also, whenever you would see a picture, you would see like that they are old-fashioned, more connected to desert, riding on camels, and the Jews are
Tribal.
strong, huh?
Tribal and sort of antiquated,
Tribal,
sort of not just old-fashioned, but
yes,
essentially primitive.
yes. And this is something also that you can see also in Zionist texts of how they looked, generally a very Western view of the East in a way. And this was very present, as if the people who wrote these history books or taught teachers how to teach history learned it from a very certain, you know, perspective on the East. But, you know, it's so weird as a child, as a Jewish child, to grow up like this, thinking, wait a minute, but we are also from here. In a way, that's part of the story, right? That we used to be thousands of years ago, we used to live here. And of course, there are Jews who still, as a minority, have lived in Palestine through the years. But you don't talk about them, by the way. They don't exist. I had to discover this thing much later in my adult life. But you do talk about Jewish people, or the Hebrew people, as the biblical historical connection to this land. So were we also not very much alike, you know, this Abrahamic kind of culture like the Arabs? That was for me always a bit, staying with a lot of questions, never dared to ask. And in parallel, I would also say that whenever you are taken to a school trip, this is also a huge part of discovering the country. There is a big value to getting to know the land. And I used to love those school trips, besides that it's fun and with your friends, but you also really get to know the land where you are. And whenever there is a ruin of something that is before 48, there's silence around it, or that there is some kind of a story being told of how the Jews fought the Arabs, and look, there is this and that, and you get the story from a complete, very strongly Zionist, heroic point of view, not asking anything about, the real events taking place. So it's becoming mostly like a myth. We are learning mythology about the Jewish fighters at the time, and yeah,
I wanted
it's
to
quite
ask you
astonishing.
about the movement of the sort of educational thrust in Zionism and the heroism of the Jew, and essentially the almost wilderness out of which the Arab comes, in relation to the militarization of the society and the militarization of children. Because ultimately, I think that I imagine that there is an understanding that we're talking about preparing an entire society to exercise lethal force. And I wonder, what is this transition exactly, or is there a transition, or is it quite simply sort of a waiting room for the IDF, the way that sort of the education system operates?
Yeah, the army has a big part of society in Israel. Um, First of all, everybody is obliged to join it. And as a child, you already grow up with seeing soldiers around you. Even if you don't have someone in your family, within school, since 1948, if I'm not mistaken, or a little bit later, Ben-Gurion decided that there should be an arm of the army which goes into education. And therefore, I myself was also a teacher soldier, we call it. So, and then later I also became more like coordinator of teacher soldiers. So I saw the system also a bit more from above, the education system and the army collaborating on that project. And it took me years to see that putting these teacher soldiers is not really just for the sake of helping the system, which is just not functioning maybe well enough, the education system, to help children. It's not like an extra personnel. It's for children to live around soldiers and feeling good about it. And actually, this is quite what Ben-Gurion already said about it. So as a child, you grow up already with soldiers around you, with or without weapons, depends on their job. And then you learn already to see soldiers as something which is not only part of society, but it's a heroic part. As a child, you want to become a soldier. You want to become part of that army. And
Also,
you
I
know
guess
that,
in the context of a very well-defined other, right? A very well-defined
yes,
object of that kind of heroism, which will be the Arab, the Palestinian, and so on.
yes. And you're being told that in the army, you can do almost anything because the army is such a huge apparatus in the Israeli society that it's true. You can you can work with computers, and therefore also the whole education system provides you, telling you also directly, if you want to be a computer programmer in the army, you should focus now within school on programming and mathematics, and it's all aimed there. You know, it's so strong that the education system itself, or like the education material being taught to you in school, already since middle school and high school for sure, is very much working together with the army to sort the different children into their best job. And it's a huge collaboration. And as a child, you're not even being asked whether you want to go to the army. I mean, that's not a question. It's obligation. It's only a question of what you're going to do there.
Inside there.
And yeah.
I want to ask you, we have about 4 minutes left. And I guess this is really the biggest question to be answered in the shortest possible time. But in the context and in the aftermath of a genocide and this degree of violence and destruction, how hopeful are you about the future of Israeli society, and particularly its education system?
I don't know about hope, I have to say. I'm very pragmatic, actually. I really believe that in order to create change, an international intervention has to happen. The Israeli society, the way I experience it now, is so deep in denial and ignorance as well, unfortunately, that you cannot move them to any direction anymore. There are a very, very small minority of people who are also, realizing things differently, but there's such a big minority that there's nothing to work with. We need an intervention from the outside, and we need law to impose on and sanctions to impose and to change the behavior of the society. Because the way it is that I've experienced the Israeli society, also beyond education, I have to say, is that we deserve everything. I grew up as a Jewish person believing that I owe everything. I owe the world. If I travel to South America, which I did, and many travel to India, you hear a lot about the Israeli behavior of, I own this place, you owe me. And this is one of the things that hurt me the most, because that's not Jewish,
Yeah.
I have to emphasize this. This is something else, and you can call it Zionist or imperialist or capitalist, everything inside. But it's a kind of a society that I would really, really wish to change. But it's not going to happen from the inside. We are way beyond the edge of the abyss. We are deep, deep, deep in a very, very bad understanding of reality. And you cannot do it within the society. We need an intervention.
Hadas Kedar, thank you very, very much for your time. I could
Thank you,
really
Martin.
keep this up for like the next 35, 40 minutes, but it's all the time we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, so it goes to that. Let me call you very briefly on the other side. Yes?
Okay. Mm-hmm.